I have been a Wizard101 player for the course of 10 plus years, and during that time I've had a lot of enjoyment out of it. This isn't a review or an expert's retrospective or anything like that, but I wanted to tear into this decade-old MMORPG and give it a really good look through a microscope, and give my thoughts on it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. While I will be talking about a lot of bad points, I still want to talk about the positives. Because nothing good comes from spouting discontent without giving input on why something is bad, or not shining a light on its positives. I truly don't think the devs want to make a bad game, but over the course of the last few years it feels like the game's dwindled a bit, and it needs to take a good look at itself and see what the problems are. I won't delve into the story too deeply because I think I should look at how the game works mechanically. Long story short, the story is honestly pretty interesting and a fun ride to go through. I'm not going to touch upon the PvP too much as I want to focus on the PvE experience for the most part. The reason why I don't want to talk about PvP as a whole is because I've never gotten into PvP, and I don't consider myself an expert in that field. But there are instances of PvP problems seeping into the PvE experience that I will touch on later. The positives! Now, it wouldn't be fair to go into this video without going into the positives about the game first. This game lasted 14 plus years for a reason, and I think it's a good idea to delve into why it's a good experience. For starters, it's got a really good opening, and a pretty basic character creator at the beginning. And while I'm not a huge fan of the pre-generated names, it's still got some variety in the names, and it's a good way to prevent players from making a bunch of pretty bad or offensive names. Granted, you'll eventually run into players with the same name as you, but it's no big deal to me. Next, you have to do a test to see what school fits you, which is a fun, immersive way to better get into the game, but you can always just skip the test and choose the school you want to play anyways. Wizard101 has 7 different schools of magic to choose from, each with their own style, strengths, and weaknesses, and I'll go over each school and what they represent on paper. Now remember, I said on paper for a reason. Take that and hold on to it for later. How each of the 7 schools of magic work are as follows. Pyromancy, or known as the Fire School, is a school that specializes in damage over time spells, burning enemies with, well, fire. They're the second strongest school in terms of raw power, but are also the second weakest school in terms of resist, health, and spell accuracy. Ice, or Thaumaturge, is all about taunting your enemies to focus their attacks on you, having a lot of resist, some of the best ward spells in the game to protect allies, and being the quote-unquote tank school. The downsides are their lack of damaging power, and they don't get a decent offensive buff until mid-game. Diviners, or the Storm School, is a school all about raw power, and in practice could be considered the gambling school. The reason why I say gambling is they have a handful of spells based around a random element. However, they're the school with the highest raw damage output, but also the lowest base accuracy and health. They're the glass cannon school. Necromancy, or the School of Death, is based on spells of draining the health of your opponents and healing themselves. They're also big on debuffs, like weakening your opponent's damage output. The downside is their mid-tier damage to compensate for their drain magic. The School of Theurgist, or the Life School, are masters of healing magic. They've got the highest base accuracy of all schools, and are capable of attaining some really good healing spells early game. Their downsides are their lack of damage, and they don't have a decent AoE spell until mid-game. The School of Conjuration, also known as the Myth School, is based around the idea of summoning and controlling minions in battle. They're also the best in terms of damage output for the Spirit School Triangle. They've also got the biggest collection of unpredictable type spells out there. The downside is their lack of self-sustain and health in combat. Sorcerers, or the Balance School, are the jack-of-all-trades school. They can do a bit of everything and can easily fill any role. They're also the school with the most buffs. The downside is because they're a jack-of-all-trades schools, they're master of none and don't excel at anything. Now that's a wide collection of schools and abilities to look at, so as of now, I'll leave it at that and look at them over in depth later. Deck building is incredibly varied, giving you lots of spells to choose from and nothing stopping you from building your deck of spells how you please. There's also a handful of alternate schools to learn into after Arc 1, such as the Astral schools. Best of all, you can use training points to gain after leveling or doing certain side quests to buy and learn spells from other schools. The game is a fun card game styled turn-based system, and combat is simple to understand and varied enough to keep things interesting. You can even see other combats going on in the background while walking around the streets. The best part about combat is you can join in on a combat anytime by just running into a dual sigil. The best quality of life change they did though is if you're in the middle of a spell animation that's about to end combat, players cannot join your duel. This was an issue for years when players were scraping by trying to survive, only to have a player join to elongate the battle and you would be defeated. Map exploration was pretty simple because each map is its own small instance, so it prevents players from getting really lost in a long-winded map zone. Spells are colorful and unique to each of their corresponding schools, and the idea of treasure cards was a good one, allowing one school to use another school's spell as a single-use treasure card. The school triangle is a pretty unique one, making certain schools effective against other spells. For example, the burning force of a fire school can melt the ice school and deal more damage to ice enemies. But a fire school won't be as effective against a fire enemy since they resist the fire element. Teaming up with even one friend in a questing system can make a huge difference, and better yet is having a crew of 4 people to quest with. The game is colorful and a living example of style over realism. A stylistic art style can keep a game alive for years. Just look at how pretty Wizard City alone looks in this game, even before its graphical updates, and it's pretty obvious the later worlds in the game after Arc 1 look pretty gorgeous too. Arc 1's story and gameplay loop might be the perfect arc in the game, simply because of how well done the gameplay loop was. Gear was varied, and the majority of gear drops would be considered viable. Spells were constantly interesting and getting better, and you felt like you were getting better every 10-player level. There were also unique school quests to go learn new spells and gain new school unique pets. Oh yeah, pets are just as unique as well. You can train pets to have unique skills to help you out in battle, giving passive stats and becoming a unique companion for your wizard. One dragon pet can be vastly different from another dragon pet simply because of their pet talents. Now, with all that being said, I think it's time to look into the game itself and figure out some of the serious lingering problems holding the game back. School identity crisis. With 7 schools of magic to choose from, you think you'd be varied with all that choice, but when you go in depth of each school, some schools are simply better than other schools, and all that comes down to how they work in PvE. Why would I, for example, play a Storm School in PvE, being as frail as they are with all of their accuracy debuffs, when Fire has better damage, better health, and better resist? Now I want to go into each school again and point out why the school identity thing is false. Or, kind of explain why the school identity idea is just kind of redundant after the mid to late game. Pyromancers are probably the second best school to PvE in, behind Necromancers, simply because they're essentially storm wizards with none of the downsides. Their damage over time spells are ridiculous in terms of damage output, and while spells like Triage exist, enemies in the PvE setting almost never use this spell. Unless they're cheating bosses, but let's get into that later. Let's compare the rank 7 spells between the Fire and Storm schools. Diviners get Stormlord, which does 690 base damage to all enemies. Nice. While Pyromancers get Fire Dragon, which has 440 base initial damage and 351 extra damage over 3 rounds. That's almost 200 more damage than Storm Wizards. While yes, you can make the argument that fire has to wait on their damage, well, you're buffing and defending yourself while the enemy is melting away, and all your buffs apply to each tick of damage over time. The average max level Storm, let's be lenient here, can deal a buff 4,000 damage to all enemies with a Stormlord. This is just me speaking in hypotheticals right now, so take what I have to say with a grain of salt. But a max leveled fire deals 4,000 initial damage plus 4,000 damage 3 more times, dealing a total of 16,000 damage over the course of 3 rounds. That is a huge difference! Yes, I'm heavily exaggerating those numbers, but in practice, that's the difference between Fire and Storm. Fire simply gets more damage output than Storm can give. Fire also has more health, resist, and better base stats than a Storm, basically completely nullifying the fact that they're supposed to be the second frailest school in the game. In fact, a Fire school's health and resist can almost keep up with just about any other school in the game, especially late game. Going on a personal tangent here, and this is purely from personal experience, and also probably heavily biased, speaking of the Storm School, I don't like the Storm School. I don't like Storm players. And this is an unironic opinion of mine, I must clarify. I don't know why it's Storm, but this school attracts some of the worst types of players in the game. Now let me rephrase. Not all Storm players are bad, but a majority of the ones I know act incredibly toxic. Right. Now that that opinion's out of the way, what's wrong with the Storm School? Storm suffers by being too frail of a school. Their accuracy is low, and they more than often than not get themselves killed because their spells fizzle when they really need them to not. Personally, I think accuracy is really stupid in this game. You're getting punished because RNG said so in a card game. Quick note. My opinion on accuracy has changed over time because this is a card game video game. I'll give it a pass. It's another mechanic in the game to make it stand out from other card games. The problem with accuracy is it's the only mechanic that's not openly explained in the game at all. So when new players are seeing their spells fizzle, they get confused as to why, and unless you dig into the manual, you're not gonna find out. Heck, there's a whole combat tutorial before the game starts, and it doesn't teach you about spell accuracy, arguably one of the biggest mechanics in the game. Not only that, but the Storm School is so boring. I don't know if it was because of all my time playing the game. Heck, I couldn't even be bothered to max my Storm School's levels because it was too tedious. I eventually did, but it was a painfully tedious grind. The only reason it was so quick was due to people favoring having a Storm friend team up with them for some reason. I don't get players. Okay, to give Storm School credit, it's not a bad school. It's just a boring and tedious school. There's a big difference, and there's a reason why the school is so popular. It's strong and effective, and can effectively make combat encounters go by quickly. The problem is the school suffers with variety, and it's a really easy to get KO'd in PvE just because of how frail they are. You might be wondering why I keep going on about variety. Well, because the majority of your playtime as a Storm is trying to complete battles before you get KO'd, and that means you'll probably be spamming one or two of the same spells every combat. However, thinking on it, this is a serious problem plaguing the entire game, but Storm School exemplifies it the most, and in order to really effectively play Storm, it forces a player into a min-max playstyle, which probably amplifies the toxicity problem of Storm players even more. Tempest is an absurdly broken spell that you get around level 28, partly through the second world. It's an X cost spell, meaning you can cast this spell at any time and deal big damage to all enemies. Once you get this spell, it's about the only thing you'll be doing the entire game, or at the very least, it's one of the most viable spells in the game. Let me be clear on that. Splashing water on enemies! And because it's so effective early game and near late game, most players end up defaulting to this spell despite later spells like Stormlord being more effective at AoE damage. Right, that was an absurdly long tangent on Storm School. Moving on. Ice School! This is all they have going for them! Because of the game's mechanics, taunting almost never seems to affect NPC targets, and it's useless in PvP simply due to a player's thought process over an AI. They have a lot of stun spells. Quick tangent about stun, why is it so useless in PvE? Even bosses in the first world are immune to stun. 98% of bosses in the game are immune to stuns, so that's essentially one mechanic in the game that's horrendously useless. Why do you bother putting in a mechanic in a game that's utterly useless? Oh, why not stun mobs? Because everyone always builds their decks to one-shot all mob fights anyways, and wasting time stunning enemies could be better spent buffing. So that's one thing that's worthless for Ice School. But what's even more annoying is when enemy mobs start using stuns on players. Players are not immune to stuns in most scenarios, so when an enemy can spam these on players while the player can't do the same to most boss fights seem unfair. Second problem, Ice School's Tier 7 spell is an AoE that stuns all targets. Sounds familiar, right? Yeah. It's a carbon copy of Stormlord, except he's even more useless because Ice School has absolutely no damage in their arsenal. Mummy, I want Stormlord! Oh, sweetie, we have Stormlord at home. And then the Stormlord at home is just this. The only thing Ice has going for them is an abundant health pool and resist. Sounds good on paper, but if you're out questing, you're spending an absurdly long time in battles because your damage output is as effective as whacking things with a pool noodle. Ice is supposed to be the tanking school to protect allies, but because allies have random target chance, you can have fights where you're the main target, which works great. Or you can also go entire fights getting ignored by the AI, while your frail allies are bashed and KO'd. And to be honest, the Ice School's shield arsenal is nothing special. They get just about as many shields as any other school, and there's nothing stopping another school from picking up arguably one of the best shield spells, Tower Shield, with training points. Yes, you can use training points to learn another school's spells, so it makes Ice School even more redundant. But the biggest problem Ice is suffering from is their damage is too nerfed. They have to spend twice as long in fights just to match damage of any other schools. In fact, Ice's major buff spell, the Ice Blade, isn't obtainable until around level 38. That's pretty terrible considering most schools get their blade buff spells at around level 12 or 6, which is the first world. Ice School probably won't be getting their Ice Blade spell until around world 4. Finally, Ice as a tanking school has 0 survivability support for themselves. A majority of their base spells, not including the ones you grind on the side or buy with Spellements, don't have a way to sustain themselves as a tank. Shield spells are simply not enough, especially since late game mobs and bosses have absurd pierce stats to bypass all those shields and resist. Ice School does a terrible job of dealing damage and sustaining themselves. Also, why does Reindeer Knight deal more damage than Frost Giant? Life School is supposed to be the weakest school in damage to offset their accuracy and healing, right? So why is it absurdly strong in damage output? It beats Ice School in damage output significantly. That seems backwards. In fact, Life School seems to be everything Ice School should be in terms of support and survivability. They could support their allies to keep them alive longer through healing. They have a decent damage output and high sustainability. Sounds like a tank school. Not only that, their health and resist aren't all that bad either. It's middle of the road, but with how the game works, it works. Cool, I have nothing wrong to say about Life, right? Why is it a better tanking school than Ice School? Why is it a better support than the Ice School? Why is Life School so absurdly powerful with its offensive stats? Healing beats resist and shields in every situation. Yeah, I know, I was pretty short with the Life School. It does what it needs to. I just think their damage is a bit absurd for all the other benefits they get. In fact, they probably have the least downsides of all schools. Sounds a tad unfair, right? Go play the Life School. Or Death School! Note here, I have a rant about bad juju here, but the spell had been changed recently in an update. However, I think my main point of said spell still stands. In terms of PvE, Necromancers are probably the king of solo play, which is approximately 98% of Wizard101 players. Don't quote me on that. Necromancers have plague spells that weaken enemy attack. They have support spells that can buff the attack of their own spells or the other player's spells. They have the best debuff in the game, Bad Juju. Bad Juju sacrifices some of the caster's health to reduce a creature's next attack by 90%. That's absurd. But wait, look at that spell for a second. Hey, do you see it? Look a little closer. Right there. Deal damage to self, PvE, or 25% of your health, PvP, to put a 90% debuff on your target. Why is this the only spell to change depending on if you're playing PvP or PvE? That means the devs are clearly capable of changing a spell to work depending on your game mode. Necromancers are grossly overpowered in the game. Their drain spells allow them to keep dealing damage while keeping themselves alive. With how the game flow works, makes Necromancers absurdly hard to kill while effectively damaging their enemies. They have an abhorrent amount of buffs to support allies, a heal, an attack buff, and plagues to ensure enemies can't deal enough damage to your teammates. Another example of play Ice School to support when Death does it so much better. Death literally can fill every role. Myth School! Nobody plays Myth School! Which is a real shame because Myth School has some of the most unique spells and playstyles in the game. They're the kings of shattering buffs, can use a few stuns, having one of the best stun spells in the game, Medusa, which isn't saying much because stuns are utterly useless in PvE. They have a spell with a unique mechanic, Confusion. They're good at making enemies vulnerable to damage by removing ward spells that buff resist, and some of their spells having the unique ability of attacking twice. Too bad their powerful twin attack spell Orthrus got nerfed to be a simple AoE. Look, I'm glad Myth finally got a really good AoE spell, because it was lagging behind other schools due to lacking a decent AoE spell. And I thought it was a cool quality of life change was to change all schools to have a good AoE 7-pip spell at around level 48. But it also kinda removed the charm of the original Orthrus, which was a powerful twin attack spell. I'm probably the only one that liked the idea of old Orthrus being a twin attack spell. Anyways, Myth sounds like an amazing, well-rounded school with lots of neat tricks. Notice how I didn't mention Myth Wizard's biggest gimmick here. Yeah, Myth Wizards, or Conjurers, are supposed to be known for summoning creature minions to fight for them. The problem is, the minions all run off of an AI, which you have no clue what spells they're capable of using, and more often than not they're absurdly weak and end up wasting traps you cast with weak attacks and tend to die in one hit. Late game, minions are almost forgotten about. You can get minions capable of healing and buffing you, but again, they run off of an AI, so they can either be helpful or useless. And 9 times out of 10, they're worthless. They are a waste of resources and time. Minions are the equivalent of bringing a knife to a gunfight. Balance School! The most balanced of the balanciest schools out there. The gimmick is they don't excel at anything, but they can do everything. Jack of all trades schools sound cool, right? Wrong. Because they can do anything, they have the least effective buffs in the game. Their heals are mediocre, and their traps are lame. Their damage output is as bad, if not worse than Ice School, and their health and resist are pretty low. They suffer from not having a dedicated prism spell through most of the game. Balance damage is actually its own damage type, like fire, ice, and so on. The problem is, those schools also have what's known as a prism spell card. For example, a Fire Prism is a trap-based card that converts the next instance of fire damage into ice damage. If I was a fire wizard fighting a fire enemy, they would normally resist my fire damage, but if I use a prism, then I can change that damage to ice, which fire enemies tend to be weak to. Now that that's explained, Balance Wizards do not have a dedicated prism card. The only prism they get is an item card they get on an amulet at level 160. So how does a Balance Wizard supposed to fight a balanced creature? They have to use their odd gimmicky cards that deal damage in other elements like Hydra or Chimera. It's supposed to be the thing that makes Balance Wizards stand out, because they're capable of casting a couple of spells that deal other elemental damage types. But, problem! Why would I want to do that when I can play a different school? The multi-element spells require far too much setup to be effective. It doesn't help that one of the nerfs was to make all school charm spells stuck to 35%. But the Balance School is stuck at a 20 to 25% buffs. KI's reasoning for this was, "'cause Balance Blades can apply to any spell. Balance spells already struggle with damage, and their buffs can't keep up with other schools. Their ward spells are pretty middle of the road at best, and they don't have good heals like a Leif School, and ironically, Death School does healing better than Balance Wizards." Speaking of death, the Necromancers are better at supporting than the Support School. Why? Necromancers have a buff that can apply to any school, and is called Dark Pact. It sacrifices some health to put 2 30% universal attack charms on a target ally. Balance Wizards' base blades can barely give 20 to 25% buffs. Dark Pact can also apply to any spell, so KI can't make the excuse of, "we kept Balance Blade weak cause their buffs apply to any school." Balance schools are objectively too weak DPS-wise, are terrible support schools, and have absolutely nothing in their arsenal to stand out. I suppose you can make the argument they have donate pip spells or a couple of wards, but the donate spells are too pip inefficient. Most schools are probably going to be using 0 pip buff spells instead. Balanced support spells cost pips. Even the Spirit and Elemental Blade cards. Spirit and Elemental Blades cast a tri-blade spell of a certain school triangle, either elemental or spiritual schools. While yes, these are 35% blades, none of these blades work for the balanced damage type, which is a majority of balanced school spells. Also, Dark Pact also costs 1 pip for two 30% universal blades, and Dark Pact works for any damage type, while Spirit and Element blades only work for a specifically chosen school triad. I can't say that very well. Okay, there's my biggest issues with each school. Now as a whole, school identity is very problematic. Spells alone can no longer keep a school interesting. Yes, Pyromancers get Fire Dragon, and Theurgists get Forest Lord. The spells are both 7 pip AoE spells. While mechanically they work slightly differently, they're still in the end a 7 pip AoE spell to attack all enemies in a combat. That's another problem. Every school plays the same mid to late game. You buff yourself, and throw out your strongest AoE spell to kill everything. Mechanically, all the schools play the same. Yeah, their spells can have a couple of unique mechanics, but it's not enough to differentiate schools. In fact, you can look at most spells in each school and see they're the same mechanically, but they have different damage numbers. Modern MMOs with different class systems implement different mechanics to keep each class unique from each other. Take Guild Wars 2 for example. Another MMO. Playing a rogue gives you a unique bar called Adrenaline that allows you to keep using skills in quick succession as long as you have Adrenaline remaining. Quick and fast, like a rogue. But go play a Revenant and you can get 2 ability trees to swap between during combat. 2 different classes that play vastly differently. Meanwhile, Wizard101's only feature to keep classes unique is their spells, which again, mechanically play the same. Imagine playing a card game, but every player has the exact same deck. As a card game, Wizard101 struggles to keep its combat loop unique per class. The other problem is stats. By the end of the game, accuracy is capped at 100% for any class. Resist tends to be the same for all schools, and all schools essentially are using the same equipment. You buff yourself and blast your best AoE spell. The only difference at that point is how much damage are you doing and what your health stat is. This is why people give schools flack. Why would I want to play an ice when a different school can have the same resist but now their spells do more damage anyways? Tangent real quick. Now I hear a lot of excuses about spell nerfs being due to making them balanced for PvP. The problem is this ends up ruining the PvE experience for players. The Fire School Ifrit used to be an amazing 8-pip spell that dealt big damage and left a 90% attack debuff on an enemy. But it got nerfed to deal less damage and the debuff did a pathetic 45% debuff. Why? Ifrit went to viable to useless with both of those changes. Nobody uses the spell anymore because it takes too much time and effort to build up for a terrible payoff. You can't make the argument it's nerfed to balance out PvP, but PvP already has PvP only spells, and bad juju from before proves that the devs are clearly able to change how spells work differently if you're in a PvP or PvE setting, so that they're not mutilated and ruined for the PvE experience. Ifrit isn't the only spell to get nerfed into utter uselessness, but it's a pretty good example of how spell nerfs tend to ruin PvE. This leads to another problem. Everyone mid to end game are going to be using the same spells because all of the other spells are just so useless and unviable, and the few good spells that people were using to differentiate combat ended up being nerfed, so nobody wants to use them. I've seen arguments of Storm players getting upset when a spell called Rashulka got nerfed to High Noon, and when the devs reverted it back due to backlash, they just slowly started trickling in an ability that nobody really liked, making the spell unviable again. And no, upgrading spells with Spellements isn't enough to justify giving them value anymore. Oh, speaking of Spellements, that's a good segue to Spellements, and why they're both a blessing and a curse. Spellements, on paper, are an amazing concept. They give value to older spells by giving you the reagents to power them up and make them last longer in terms of usefulness. Spellements also have an upgrade path for each spelemental spell to grant them an even more utility. Some of the utility is surprisingly effective too. My max level Pyromancer can still find a utility from his level 1 Firecat spell after it was granted a damage into detonate ability through Spellements. This cool strategy allows me to break any fire ward or other ward to detonate a fire damage over time to deal big damage. That is such a cool ability. So what's the problem? Well, it's a major problem that plagues the entire game. Grinding. Grinding for Spellements is one of the most obtuse and tedious things you can do in this game. To farm Spellements, you have to fight final bosses of each world. Well, why not just farm the final boss of the first world with your max level? I hear you asking. It's because once you surpass a world's level cap, those bosses no longer drop Spellements. For example, if you want to farm the first world's final boss, on a normal run, you'd probably be around levels 10 through 11. So if you fight the boss at those levels, it'll drop Spellements. But as soon as you surpass around level 15, that first world boss no longer drops those Spellements. This applies to all bosses in the main game. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, some Spellements can only be farmed from certain worlds. For example, if you want to farm Spellements for your tier 1 spells, you can only farm them from, say, the first or second world. As soon as you surpass those worlds level-wise, you won't be able to efficiently farm those bosses for those Spellements anymore. So let's say the Spellement system came out after an update where they release Spellements and you want to upgrade your Firecat. You're probably level 50 to 100 at this point, so I guess that's too bad. You have to wait until they came out with an update where you had to farm events to get these Spellements. Or you could buy packs. Yeah, you could buy your Spellements, so that's great. So for us max level players, the only other way to get Spellements is to grind special bosses known as skeleton key bosses. I despise skeleton keys as a concept with how Wizard101 works. First, you have to find the boss somewhere in the game, which thank goodness the wiki exists, because without it, I don't know how people can figure out most of this out. And you farm the boss. But to farm the boss, you have to collect skeleton keys. Skeleton keys are another item you have to farm for in abundance, and each key takes up inventory space. Your already very limited inventory space, mind you. I don't know why skeleton keys can't work like reagents, where they can take up reagent space and not inventory space. This game already gives you a pathetically small inventory that only takes 1 to 2 hours of gameplay to fill up. How long does it take to collect a decent chunk of keys? On a good day, around 4 to 5 hours, but nobody's ever constantly that lucky, so it could take longer. Say you got 15 keys, now you got 15 runs worth of skeleton key boss runs. Skeleton keys do nothing but inflate an already tedious grinding problem this game has. You farm resources to farm resources! Now, when you farm these Spellement bosses, each fight has some sort of gimmick to make the fights last longer than average. These mechanics are more often not fun because they're built to be tedious and artificially long. Because every school essentially plays the same, you're only gonna end up picking up the best farming school, probably Necromancer, and spend hours grinding. Each attempt can leave you with possibly 1 to 3 Spellements that you actually want, and there's a chance you won't even get what you're looking for. Upgrading your spells through Spellements require Spellement reagents in the hundreds. You farm keys to farm bosses to farm Spellements, and repeat that cycle for probably, if I'm being lenient here, 2 to 3 weeks on literal non-stop play. Doing the same thing for hours on end, that's not fun. So most players are probably not going to have upgraded spells. The one thing to make the game more interesting was killed behind a time gate called farming. Oh, glory day! Due to a recent update, a lot of Spellements are changed to be locked behind what are called gold skeleton key boss doors, and you can no longer farm for gold skeleton keys as drops. Instead, you can only get them through events like PvP or a reward for 15 days worth of daily reward quests.
I'm a brave boy. Not a brave enough boy for this!
Why? The bosses themselves are already hard enough to fight and farm. Why do you have to go and pointlessly extend the farm behind a literal time gate? Let me be clear. This is maliciously designed. Skeleton keys are both metaphorically and literally locked time gates. You either have to buy a monthly subscription to get membership monthly points to redeem about 1 to 3 keys per month, or do 15 daily quests to scrape up 1 key. You are legit averaging 2 to 3 keys per month, depending on if you're a member or not. The only excuse for this update is to inflate the value of memberships. That's the only reason why I see this change ever being a thing. Why is resetting your Spellement paths locked behind paywalls? A lot of advanced players have to reset their spells constantly because some paths are PvE locked and cannot be used in PvP. The issue is, if you're locked behind a spellamental playstyle but want to try advanced combat but your spells can't be used, you'll have to end up spending money to change it. And to change it back, it costs more money, and it's not cheap either. You might end up spending $15 to $25 to change all of your spells between playstyles. You cannot experiment here. You will be nickeled and dimed if you try to do that. The utter insanity that is farming. Okay, you've probably heard me talk about the term farming for a while. I'm sure most MMO players watching this video can understand what I'm talking about, but to those that aren't aware, farming is a term used to describe fighting the same boss or mobs over and over again to get more of its unique drops. For example, Bosses have a set determined type of loot you can obtain from defeating them, and some bosses even have unique gear you can only get from them, so fighting the same boss multiple times gives you more chances at that unique loot. It's a pretty standard practice in most games, and especially MMOs. I'm probably going to start sounding metagamey and ranty when trying to make these arguments, so take this criticism with a grain of salt. So there's two major problems with how Wizard101 does its farming. One is the loot itself being mostly unrewarding. A lot of the game's loot has little to no value to the player. Gear stats you get as drops are underwhelmingly weak for the most part. In Arc 1, this wasn't an issue because a lot of the gear was viable, and each school at the endgame, which was level 50 at the time, had to farm multiple different bosses to get the best gear for their endgame. For example, a fire school might have to farm one boss for their best hat, while an ice school had to fight a certain different boss for their best hat at level 50. While yes, all schools will have definitive endgame gear regardless of where you get it, it should be a fun and optional endeavor, while other pieces of gear should be enough to sustain you for it. Unfortunately, after Arc 1, the gear quality drops off a cliff, which begins the farming problem. Let's say you begin Arc 2, having the best gear at level 50 for Arc 1. Whenever you find and pick up new pieces of gear, it's not even in the same league as your current gear. Even bosses at the ends of worlds can't match your current best gear. Okay, quick note here. I had a long rant about why farming the same boss/gauntlet over and over again for gear was dumb, but decided to remove that argument because the argument in itself was very stupid. People farm raid bosses in other games all the time for gear. I think my main issue with how Wizard101 does it was how unrewarding the farming actually was and how samey it felt. There's no variety in the combat to keep farming fun or interesting. Plus, the effort put into the farm doesn't justify the rewards being trash. In fact, Wizard101 tends to be so stingy with its rewards that after 2 to 3 hours of farming, there's a chance you don't even get a single piece of gear you're looking for. So all you have to do is keep trudging away at it until the boss finally gives you what you want. I've actually met players that farmed a boss for months and still haven't gotten a single piece of good gear. Farming bosses for hours should reward players with something, but the game doesn't have anything else worth farming for. And once you get your best gear, that's it! You have zero incentive or reason to farm the boss again, as its loot pool is just full of garbage you can get for farming basic mobs in other places of the game. In some cases, some of the loot is literal trash. The level 100 set also had a farming problem. You need to beat 2 other dungeon instances to farm the 3rd dungeon for the gear. The hat, robes, and boots all drop from the same boss regardless of school. The athame comes from the first boss of that dungeon, and the ring is dropped from a gold skeleton key boss. Another farm-to-farm boss! Did I mention I hate skeleton keys? Update. They changed this boss to a stone key boss. Still annoying, but stone and wood keys can actually be farmed for, unlike gold keys. But at the very least here, some of the more common gear drops in this dungeon as you play through it are still a distinct upgrade from your level 60 gear, and the bosses have a chance of dropping golden skeleton keys so that you can potentially get the key drops you're looking for while farming for your other gear. Oh yeah, another update. They changed mob drops to no longer drop golden keys, so there's actually no value to the majority of drops anymore, yet again making mob drops trash again. And each run through this dungeon takes around 2 to 3 hours, and this is with the common max level characters, and I'm speaking for the majority of casual or common players. Yes, you can argue, oh, it only takes me 10 minutes cause I have an MLG group. Well, most players aren't hardcore elite players, and most players are gonna be common players that don't have that hardcore mindset. But back when level 100 was the cap, it took so much longer, around 3 to 4 hours per run. Again, this isn't farming to get fun or cool gear like other loot runs. This is farming to, and I can't stress this enough, be viable in the game. If you're not playing through the story with this gear upgrade, you're just purposely handicapping yourself for no reason. So, do you want to slog through the game with unoptimized gear? Or do you want to shoot yourself in the foot and grind for the same gear over and over again just so that handicap isn't so miserable to play through? Then level 130 happened, and good lord, it was such a miserable affair. There was a set of Dragoon gear that became the most viable set, and it's a crafted set of gear. To get this, you need to do crafting quests until you are a legendary crafter and farm reagents for it. Most recipes in the game only required around 12 to 20 or so different reagents. Each piece of gear for the Dragoon set demanded well over 500 plus reagents per piece of armor. Oh, farming reagents can't be that bad. Well, get ready to farm this single 10-minute dungeon for 1 month straight non-stop, because getting that many reagents for a full set took that long. And if you have multiple characters, I feel so sorry for you. The grinding for gear problem got so bad, it turned a lot of players into miserable people. Everyone that has been farming these places became increasingly more and more toxic, and always lashed out at newer players trying the farming process for the first time. I think this is due to what I'm going to call farming fatigue. Nobody was having fun with the process, and everyone was trying to make it as efficient as possible, which is not a good sign. And this trickled over into continued story updates, where people don't listen to the story anymore and would rather instead mash through it to hit max level. The game's own design has ruined itself as a result. The game ends up feeling more like a chore or job instead of a fun experience. And no, the devs do not help the toxicity, and so far proven to only throw fuel in the fire. At this point, I'm just rambling. I asked a few friends that play grindy games with raid bosses and such, where they also have a lot of fun. I posed the question, why do you grind these games, and is it fun? If so, why? They gave various answers. However, the majority of answers say people grind to improve themselves, get better stats and such, gaining XP and more. Unfortunately, Wizard101's problem is stats, except for health, aren't tied to your level. They're mostly tied to your gear. However, grinding for gear is not a bad thing, especially in MMOs. But Wizard101's grinding problem comes down to, again, the mechanics. It's not fun to grind or farm for gear. It's a chore. No matter what school you're playing as, all you're going to do is buff yourself or one other person and hit everything with an AoE beat stick for hours. And there's no system in place to speed up the process. Well, there is, but it's very disgusting. More on that later. The rewards you get throughout the process are utterly useless. You get pathetic amounts of gold, a bunch of housing decorative items that give the player zero value, and not even aesthetically pleasing gear.
Oh! Ew!
In fact, a lot of bosses you farm drop gear that looks like recycled content. Why can't I at least recycle all this useless stuff I'm getting into something more valuable? You're essentially working with 1 to 2% drop rates, and more often than that, it feels like less than that. Memberships have zero value. As an old MMO, Wizard101 has what's called a subscription-based model of pay. The game upfront tells you it's free to play, but that only means you have access to a limited space in the game. In order to access everything the game has to offer, you have to pay the game a monthly fee of around $10 per month. Compared to other MMOs, that's honestly really cheap for a membership. For what you get, besides a campaign and extra backpack space for some reason, there's nothing of real value gained from being a member. You can get a variety of member benefits, but I say that in quotes because for some reason you'll never have any member benefit you actually want. Instead of the benefits are time gated. Let me explain. So for example, one of the membership benefits you can get is double gardening rewards, which allows a member to gain double the rewards from harvesting or gardening plants. This is really good for harvesting reagents or some items for later use. This is a really nice feature that members can get. So what's the problem? For some reason, these benefits rotate out in a time frame, and they seem randomly picked, like there's no coherent pattern to what benefit you actually get during any period of time. Like, for 1 week, you get double gardening benefits, and the next week, you can harvest double reagents. Why are the benefits spread out and drip-fed to your paying players, KI? Why not allow members to have all the benefits at once because they're paying members? These people are paying for a service, but you drip feed it to them and swap it out whenever you want. Like, imagine if I subscribed to a video streaming service, right? And that service had all of my favorite shows on it, but the service decides we're only going to air this one season of a show you like for this week, and stop airing it to show it another next week. Oh, you want to watch that old season? Too bad. Maybe till we decide to re-air it at some random date later. Oh, and keep buying that subscription, cause maybe we'll show it some other month. Like, that'd be stupid, right? Am I the only one that thinks that's stupid? Oh. Yeah. They added a loyalty store to the game. Woo. Basically, if you're a subscribing player over the course of several months, you get loyalty points to spend in the loyalty store. The better you subscribe, the more points you accumulate every month. But for some reason, these points are capped at 12, so if you're a long-time player, you will eventually lose out on claiming points because your points fill up. You can spend those points, but there's nothing actually worthwhile to buy in the loyalty store. You can buy from a handful of items, maybe a few free packs, which makes the game feel stingy. And you can't even spend your points in bulk, because you can only buy a limited amount of these items every month. I suppose KI doesn't want to let people get too many free loot boxes, even though these are people paying for a membership. They're already paying you, KI, why can't you just give them more stuff? A lot of the time, the membership feels artificially valued. What I mean by that is there's a lot of basic features robbed from free players simply by not having a membership. There is an overabundance of worlds and content in the game. Basically, an entire story or expansion is separated into several different worlds in this game. Each world tends to offer a new spell or skill, new gear, things to find, etc. But for some reason, the paywall for premium zones is locked halfway through the very first world. Why? You have literal dozens of worlds and loads of content, yet you block off free players within the first 20 to 30 minutes of your game. This is not enough time or content for a new player to get a good judgment or grasp on the game to consider buying it. I know this point has been driven to the ground to death, but it's still a point to bring up nonetheless. Another membership feature is expanded backpack space, which is just dumb. Your backpack space fills up quickly with lots of junk you find while playing the game that it almost feels necessary to buy a membership to circumvent a simple problem. Oh wow, money solves this basic problem. And even then, a membership still doesn't technically solve the backpack space problem. So just to fix and circumvent this problem, they sell you backpack space elixirs. You can buy 3 per character to get an additional 150 slots of backpack space. Isn't that nice? Now hand over $15 to $20 per elixir, please. Oh, and this is per character too. This isn't account-wide. I hate this because you're forcing players to double dip into their wallets to fix a simple problem. And why are memberships required if you can just buy premium zones with crowns? Yeah, once you buy a zone, it's free on that account forever. So once you end up buying zones, you have even less incentive to buy a membership because you own the game and can play it for free whenever you want. It's like buying an expansion to another MMO in a sense. Strange. I feel like I've seen that before. Call me stupid, but I'm actually one of those players that actually ended up buying all the premium zones with crowns because I hate feeling pressured to finish worlds in a time frame. I'm honestly a particularly slow player that would prefer to take their time, and that's why I don't like subscription games, because it's forcing you to log in to squeeze all the value out of your membership that you pay for. Sucks to buy a month of membership only to play the game for a week and drop it. I do like this feature to buy premium zones though, that I'm okay with. What I don't like is how shop prices are affected by a membership. Things like Scrolls of Fortune are so expensive to players that don't pay a membership, but are suddenly half off when you're a member. But that half off is basically says reasonable price instead of member discount. So you could turn a $50 price tag into an otherwise worthless item into a $30 tag. It's still overpriced for what you get, but it ends up feeling more like it's in your price range in a sense. But other than those things listed, that's about all you get from being a premium member. You get rotating member benefits, so you can't actively take advantage of some of the actual good features whenever you want to plan around them. A loyalty store with a buy limit, premium zone content that can be bypassed by paying with crowns, and very few discounts, if you can even call them that, on very certain items. Meanwhile, Guild Wars 2, another MMO, has been free to play, gives an entire campaign as part of said free content, and can live with just selling you additional story content expansions for about $10 to $20 a piece, and Wizard101 can't even get their in-game store to function properly half the time. The simplicity argument and why it's stupid. I really thought about this argument I keep hearing about over and over again. That argument being, I like this game because it's simple enough to just turn my brain off and just have a casual time in the game. Okay, yes, it's simple. You can go through the entirety of Arc 1 as a simple run through the game and have a lot of enjoyment. And yeah, up through the final world of Arc 1, you still had enough stimulating challenge and enough things going on to have an enjoyable experience. And I'm gonna lowball it. If you're a casual player enjoying the game and reading the story, you could probably get through Arc 1 in around a month, and that is if you're only playing 2 to 3 hours per day. Every world you learn a new spell, improve your game, and constantly improve yourself. Okay, so where's the problem? The majority of players mash through the story. They don't pay attention to how the improving works, and think it's mediocre. I don't think their opinions are invalid, but if people are going to start telling me things like, oh, you're just nitpicking, you should just turn your brain off, while ignoring everything the game is trying to give you, is dumb. And it's these arguments, and this playstyle that tells the devs, oh, players aren't going to care about a well thought out scenario, they're speeding through the game, so let's force them to farm for months on end because they're not going to pay attention to how bad some mechanics actually are. You know what kind of players have this mindset? Gacha players. Players that enjoy casual mobile games that grind on your patience and have a mindset of turn your brain off and press one button. Wizard101 Modern Combat is build your deck with 4 to 5 cards, click 2 buttons, kill everything. That sounds like a gacha game. So what's a gacha game? Well, I'm going to take this argument and hold on to it for a later point because I think it's very important. But for now, I think players need to realize that they're getting put into a gacha game mindset as they play. Wizard101's combat after Arc 1 has gone down a decline of being duller and duller as you play through the game. You're putting less cards in your deck to speed up combat, which is the game's main selling point. If advanced players are trying to tell other players to speed up their combat by forcibly making meta decks because combat is slow and boring, that's a problem. Well, it's slow and boring because combat is too simple and doesn't engage or stimulate the player enough. And this causes a rise in really toxic players that gang up on newer players with an elitism mindset. This chases away new players, which helps nobody. I really hate elitism. If you're arguing the game's simple enough that a toddler can do it, don't get upset when other players start doing things that make their own fun. I unironically brought a ward to a late game fight, and when I used it, I got told off by 2 other players by being told, "Why are you wasting time?" and nonsense like that. Now, I personally don't care what people say to me. Call me a scrub all you want. I don't care. But if people are going to start mocking people playing the game the wrong way, I'm sorry, but that chases players off and angers other players. Besides, it's supposed to be a simple game. Why would you want to start getting mad at players playing with simple strategies? If you pay close attention, Arc 1 was engaging enough in its simple concept to give the player something new to do every world. Every 10 levels, they're getting gear upgrades, and they weren't a grind to get. Heck, you can find some gear dropped as you travel to constantly improve yourself as you explored. And spells in Arc 1 weren't brokenly strong until the end of the arc, where it feels like the culmination of your journey because you became something great. You became a powerful wizard. You get a cool rank 7 AoE spell that shows off the best of your school's strength. Now, once you begin Arc 2, the only thing you're going to end up doing for the rest of the game is use the 1 or 2 spells you got around the end of Arc 1. This simplicity makes farming for gear boring. This simplicity makes playing through the game boring. And when you hit the gear farming wall to start doing those repetitive motions in a simple gameplay loop, the game becomes a chore. Now the other thing to note, at the start of Arc 2, Wizard101 started introducing a new mechanic to solve bosses called cheating bosses. Before the first world of Arc 2 was released, the devs revealed a bonus dungeon players at level 50 to try to beat. It was a slog of a dungeon where you hit certain bosses every several levels that had the ability to literally cheat. They had mechanics where they can use abilities in battle that players had no access to. Abilities like, if a player heals, I get a free heal, or if you cast a trap, I'll remove it for free immediately. I'm pretty sure this was a design choice by the devs to attempt to add some complexity to the game, or make some bosses feel like they're strong opponents. The problem with the idea in general is, the game isn't even following its own rules. Yeah, that sounds dumb because I literally called these cheats, but if you have to make the game cheat to add complexity to a fight, that's ridiculous. And most of these cheats end up being, no, you can't play these spells, limiting to what a player can even do even more than what they usually do. Some cheats become so overwhelmingly dumb that players try to find exploits just to get around them because they're not fun. The game isn't providing the player a new tool or mechanic to use to engage them more. It's simply forcing the player to not do certain things. And unless you read the wiki, you don't have any clue what the boss is gonna do until you lose to it several times. And losing and re-entering the dungeon doesn't put you near the boss. It spawns you at the dungeon entrance, and you have to run through an already clear and empty dungeon just to get back in the fight. The game does so so many things to slow down the player, it makes gameplay a slog, and forces players to not use certain abilities in certain fights. This makes some school mechanics completely useless in certain fights because some cheats just objectively counter them. Remember playing a card game where your opponent can just do whatever they want because potatoes? Imagine if you are playing a team game. You have a paladin, rogue, fighter, and cleric. You're playing a cleric, and the game suddenly says, "Cleric can't do anything in this fight." Oh cool, being a useless paperweight is what I want to do in a team game. Right, that's an extreme example, but it's not far off for some certain fights in Wizard101's cheating bosses roster. Playing a school that heals? Nah man, don't use any healing spells as a life. Big damage over time spells? Don't do anything fire related. This problem is further exemplified when KI added a patch to add a challenge mode to bosses, but this is literally taking already existing cheat bosses and making their challenge mode the default cheats these bosses had before, and the normal mode is just an easier mode for players just going through the story content without the cheats. The reward for playing the challenge mode don't seem different from playing the normal mode I hear, but I could be false on this. They made the game even easier for PvE players that already mastered the challenge mode versions of these bosses. Why? Because why do you need a challenge mode? I thought it was a simple game. Starting to see why the simplicity argument is bad. Right, problem 2 of the simplicity argument being dumb. Let's go back to team titles. Fighters hit hard, rogues stealth, clerics heal. Cool. Wizard101 has 7 schools. Okay, that's a lie. It's one school with different flavors. Every class in Wizard101 is a fighter with a different weapon. How do you effectively combat as a fire? Blade into 7-pip AoE. As a life, blade into 7-pip AoE. Myth, blade into 7-pip AoE. You see the pattern here? Just cause the spells look different, you're still doing the same simple thing. Stats are varied, right? Nah, only 2 stats matter, damage and resist for every school. Yes, every school has 1, maybe 2 unique spells to it, but that's not enough to justify having 7 different classes. They each need to do something to be unique. Nerfing all the spells into the ground so that nobody uses 90% of them doesn't help the game, and the 2% of fights forcing players into using their useless spells because of cheats isn't good either. Players should want to use a variety of spells, otherwise what's the point of 7 schools? Again, why would I want to play a school that deals less damage compared to a school with no offensive drawbacks? To quote, "Oh, it's a game made for families, you're being too harsh on it." If that's true, why does the game try to add mechanics like cheating bosses? Why does the game constantly force terrible monetization practices that are bordering on illegal to kids gambling, while parents aren't dumb enough to fall for them? Mechanics are just over-tuned and overcomplicated enough that really young kids can mostly get confused in them, while being so mind-numbingly simple for adults. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. The game's audience are teens to mid-adults that have been around the game since its start. The devs know this, but pretend to call it a family game, while keeping it obscenely childish and simple. This is further exasperated by when they completely remade the first world story by making it even more childish. Yes, they remade the introduction to be more accessible with more tutorials, but they changed the story to be very childlike, and none of the current player base liked this story change. The game isn't simple enough for a majority of little kids to fully understand and enjoy, and it's not complicated or stimulating enough for adults to like. Even if a young kid beats Arc 1, they're not gonna understand cheating bosses or new mechanics in Arc 2, and probably more than likely drop the game. This is why the game isn't gaining new players, it's stagnating. The controversy that is challenge mode and advanced combat content. Recently, this game has had a lot of backlash and controversy when it comes to its challenge mode type content. Things like raids and its recent update known as the Nightmare Dungeon have been bashed for being too anti-casual. Now for this, I'm going to try and make the opposing argument. I don't think the game trying to add difficult content is a bad thing. The devs are trying something new to enhance the lifespan of the game and give the min-max players something to do, and I think that's a good idea. Now, hear me out on this point. Most MMOs have content similar to where they have challenging content. Players are saying the devs aren't adding anything for endgame players to do, but players are still upset even though the challenge content is supposed to be just that. Now, I understand you're not going to make everyone happy. However, I can also see why they're arguing against some of this content. For one, it's not well explained to the player. There's certain rules a player needs to follow, one of them making decks only suitable for PvP. Challenge mode content should be designed to test a player's skill at a game in a PvE sense. Tacking on PvP rules to PvE content is such a dreadful idea, as PvP rules include banning almost, if not more than half the base spells in the game. It forces players into one strategy, and to players that never PvP, this is a very jarring change. Advanced combat is never explained in any tutorial that I know of. This is infuriated because the game itself, right at the beginning, shows a full-fledged interactive tutorial of basic game mechanics, and even offers another interactive tutorial shortly later in the game to explain higher cost spells when you get your first rank 2 spell. Personally, I think PvP rules should stay as far away from PvE content as possible, as they're two completely different game modes that couldn't be more different from each other. Man, I can't do synonyms very well. The purpose of PvP rules in a card game is to ban or change spells so that theoretically it'll allow all players to have an even playing field when combating each other. So on paper, all players are supposedly evenly matched when combating each other. The problem with challenge mode content is you're fighting NPCs that have none of these restrictions and are also capable of using cheats. The enemies already have an unfair advantage over players, and are forcing PvP rules and restrictions on players is downright cruel and unnecessary. You could even go on and say that this is not fun. This doesn't challenge a player's skill in the game. It's adding unfair nerfs to a player's arsenal while bumping up artificial difficulty to the enemies you face. Plus the fact that you're unable to change your deck in a challenge mode content is just bizarre. Why does this card game not have a side deck system to allow players to change out some spells mid-dungeon? I will never understand. The last insult to injury is the Spellements system heavily discourages and damages this game mode. If you've upgraded any Spellements down a tier which is banned in PvP play, you will have to spend real money to either change your spells to work for one niche mode players refuse to play, and it's on a per spell basis. So to fix all of your cards, you may be spending around $20 to $30 per character just to change all of your spells once for this game mode, and then spend real money to change them back once you're done with all of the content. Challenge mode content offers no reason nor incentive to play through it other than bragging rights. While some can offer some very slight improvements to your gear, a majority of players still won't entertain their time into these challenges. There's no real reward for doing any of this content, and it unfairly nerfs the player into the ground to the points where it's no longer a fun challenge, but rather a tedious grind. And if you're into Spellements, just to save money, you're stuck playing this hard content until you get what you want, just to no longer worrying about paying for more money for Spellement resets. Personally, I think the game should be trying to strive to add more challenging content for endgame players. The problem is, what we have now is too few and downright unrewarding to play through, and it really is unfair. Imagine if players in PvP could cheat. That's what challenge mode essentially is. The game has so many dead in the water features.
Rate my stitch. Rate an outfit, add my outfits, fashion studio, leaderboards, Hall of Fame.
This game has a serious issue whenever it tries to add something new or innovative. I'm not saying to not innovate to keep the game alive. I'm saying every time the devs try to add a new feature, it comes out half-baked or feeling useless, or in other cases, detrimental to the game. Yes, the game added Pit Mastery, but that only ruined some spells requiring an obligatory extra wait time and requiring a high level requirement, while also telling players, if your school isn't valid on its own, we made it easier to use spells from other schools, which just baffles me. School Mastery Pips basically say schools aren't good enough to stand out on their own, so they have to pull spells from other schools. And what's worse is that School Mastery Pips are only really effective with a couple of spells anyways, because your stats are only good for the school you picked. They created a pin system to suck it into your gear so you can get decent stats to multi-class more effectively, but pins are an endgame item at around level 160. So once you unlock School Pit Mastery at level 40, it's still not a good idea to multi-class until you farm for gear and pins at level 160. And even then, you're missing key spells out of those schools you multi-class into, like spell buffs or blades, that are imperative to those other schools, that make the Pit Mastery and multi-classing feature too weak to be of any value at that level. Yes, some schools made it work, but only with very specific playstyles and gear. The idea of these mastery pips came out when at level 160, players got hybrid spells. Basically, a school would learn a spell that required a mastery pip from another school. For example, Fire got a spell that required a Myth Mastery Pips, so they would swap their Pip Mastery into Myth, so once it charged up, they'd gain a Myth Pip, which is used in the hybrid spell's cost. Hybrid spells usually had an effect irrelevant to your school's best effect, so nobody ended up using the hybrid spells for a majority of the time, I guess unless some of them had really decent damage. The Fire Hybrid spell's secondary effect placed Mist Traps, which are near useless because unless you're doing a specific setup for maybe one other spell like the Scion of Fire spell, Myth Traps are useless because they buff myth damage, but you're dealing fire damage. An update to this: when you get the appropriate gear at levels 160 to 170, dual schooling is actually viable and fun. The problem is, again, the best feature for this is gatekept behind both the best gear at level 170, pins, and to make multi-classing viable, you need Spellements to allow specific spells from multi-schooling to work with each other. So yeah, lock behind Spellements and gear. Why does a fun feature like this only become decently available behind an awful grind at the end game? Fishing exists, and it's utterly boring, and even downright broken. I don't know if it's a server issue or whatever, but in order to fish, each fishing spell requires the use of your energy meter. It's like a second mana bar that you do for recreational activities in the game like gardening, fishing, or cantrips. Okay, problem with fishing. It's so slow. Kids aren't gonna enjoy this. Your current audience won't do this unless they're forced to do it, or just that bored. And in order to catch a fish, you have to position yourself so that the lure is in front of the fish, wait painfully slowly for the fish to bite, and then wait for the cue when the fish has a snag, and then finally press the spacebar to wait 3 to 4 agonizing seconds for some reason to see some reeling animation to see if you caught the fish or not. And sometimes, due to latency issues, you can have some lures in front of a fish and they just ignore it. I can't even tell if it's there. I don't know. Fishing needs something done to make it engaging, but fine, I can almost ignore this feature. If it wasn't for the stupid battle pass.
If you guys actually did want to buy the Scroll of Fortune, it would cost you 7,500 crowns. That's only if you have membership though. 15k if you actually, want to buy this without a membership, although I don't really know why you would, and you'd pretty much get to purchase all of the premium tiers, which have quote-unquote better rewards. And the reason why I say quote-unquote better rewards is because I just really don't think any of the rewards inside of the Scroll of Fortune are very good at all. 15 Spellements, I mean, that's like whatever. It's a decent amount of Spellements, but Spellements at the end of the day, I don't really want to buy into it. You got gold, that's a gold, I mean, come on. Lunari, it's like whatever. Some people don't even play Beast Moon. Gold Boost Elixir, not exactly the best. Then you got some Beast Moon seeds, which like one Beast Moon seed isn't gonna make the difference at all. 3 reagents from Mega Reagents. This is just, I mean, come on, guys. Like, they're just clowning on us, I feel like, with some of these items right here.
Yes, this game has a battle pass system to force engagement out of players and nothing else. What's in a battle pass? Like farming bosses, it's 90% junk and 5% of stuff that you can't get anywhere else in the game, and 5% hit or miss things. And a lot of things in the battle pass is just stuff to use in other tedious events that all feel half-baked. Also, to get any of the decent rewards, you have to pay for a Scroll of Fortune, which is around $15 or so worth of premium currency, or double that if you're not a member. Okay, cool. There's still this one-of-a-kind armor skin that you may or may not want to use. Better farm the battle pass for the season, cause once it's gone, you can never ever get it again. It's a slap in the face when half the rewards are literally just gold when you're probably already carrying abundances of that you get for free. It's a disgusting FOMO tactic to force players to stay engaged in your game, to keep doing boring tasks like fishing every day, or play stupid events like Beast Moon. Oh yeah, Beast Moon is a thing. I'm almost okay with it. Almost. I've done enough Beast Moon to fry my brain and figure it out, but it's so new player unfriendly, it's not even funny. The idea is you select a beast form before a game starts, and then get a pre-built deck unique from that form promoting a unique playstyle. Huh, I wonder why the rest of the game can't have playstyles like this. Then you use these pre-built decks to fight other players to gain points. The only reason why you'd play Beast Moon is either for event points towards the Battle Pass, oh, I'm sorry, Scroll of Fortune, or to get some, honestly, admittedly, really cool cosmetic Beast Moon gear that you can stitch into your gear, which is kinda neat. Yes, I admit, the Beast Moon gear looks really cool, but it is such a convoluted process to grind for that I just gave up ever getting a cool set from this. Beast Moon also does a terrible job at teaching new players how to play. Yeah, you get a really quick tutorial screen that vomits exposition to you, but with how the game actually plays, casual players can't and won't typically learn things like school advantages, your role in a certain form, why you need to switch to a new form once you die, and how to actively get points. There is also an alternative Beast Moon mode in a different event where you fight increasingly difficult NPCs as beast forms, but if you don't split your squads efficiently, which surprise, a tutorial doesn't recommend or suggest to do, you won't have enough time to finish these fights. Oh yeah, there's a time limit. And long spell animations are actually a detriment to the time limit. So 9 times out of 10, most teams never complete round 1, cause players are either confused, or spells take too long to finish, or a combination of the two. The latency in this game has proven to make the time limits the absolute worst thing, and because of the combination of poorly made tutorials, this again creates toxic players harassing new players for not knowing what to do. You cannot blame new players because the tutorial sucks eggs. If you have to look up a YouTube video tutorial on how to play your game mode, you failed at developing a good tutorial. Decathlon! exists. You climb a tower with increasingly difficult enemies. The kicker of this, though, is you can only use treasure cards. No gear modifications whatsoever. And you have to use a Decathlete dex, which gives some minor stat buffs. And you gain rune reagents on completing floors to craft better decks to complete Decathlete stages easier. Problem: if you're new to this event, you won't complete all 10 floors, unless you go hardcore go at it every day, every hour. You only get a limited number of attempts, even less if you're not a member, which is just stupid. And once you spend a treasure card, it's used up and can't be used again. Though fizzled treasure cards return to the deck, which is fine. You can cheese decathlons with a good pet, but that's it. You need to craft the better decks to be efficient at these. Okay, cool. What do you get from completing these events? More battle pass points. And reagents to possibly craft a cool looking lawn cosmetic. Which are these giant Hulk fish things, I guess. That's it. I'm gonna be honest, really lame event with a tedious build-up and little payoff. Some people can like these fists. I don't know, man. They're just not for me. Thanks. Cantrips is a feature that exists in the game.
It's everyone's favorite cantrip, Eldritch.
They exist. That's all I could say. You do fancy flourishes or animations and you gain cantrip XP. Cantrip XP is dumb because all cantrips do is do animations. Unlock certain Spellement chests which require multiple players to be in the same place to do, and this almost never happens because those chests are too rare, or allow you to cast Teleport to World cantrips, which I feel like needs to be a basic feature anyways. The worst part is cantrips use energy, which you're gonna use for other activities like gardening or pet training, which is far more useful. I'm gonna say it, cantrips are literally a waste of time and energy. Guilds are another feature that exists in the game. So, guilds exist? Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I don't have much to say on guilds because I was unsuccessful in making one. So I can only speak secondhand as an outsider from this topic, so take what I'm going to say with a grain of salt. The requirements are ridiculous. To make a guild, you have to meet 2 requirements. First, you need to be max level. Secondly, you have to have a minimum of 11 other friends online at the same time to invite them all into your guild. So with how dwindling or casual the player base is, unless you're some big Wizard101 content creator, or somehow popular enough, you're not gonna get a guild made. Even if you hypothetically manage to get a guild made, the benefits aren't worth it. You unlock the guild house, where you get a bank which just ends up being junk storage for guild members. You can decorate your guild hall, I guess, and you unlock raids. Raids require a key and a full team of 12 players to do. From what I hear, they take hours to complete, and you get some pretty mediocre drop rates. Not only that, from what I hear, the raids are exceedingly difficult. But KI did have some advice for these raids though. Oh. It's mocking the players while showing them an insulting gif. Then they follow up with, yeah, this isn't a good look for you, devs. Mocking your already dwindling player base is only going to hurt you in the long run. The problem with raids isn't the difficulty. The problem is it's another instance of farming to farm. You need to farm Azoth to create raid keys. How much Azoth is the raid key? Thousands. But this requirement is shared across the guild. Okay, cool. So how do you get Azoth? You farm boss refight gauntlets. How do you get these gauntlets? You craft them by farming hundreds of reagents. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is so much worse than skeleton keys. It's locked behind a guild requirement, followed by a reagent requirement, followed by boss gauntlet requirements. That's 3 major hurdles 99% of players aren't going to do. And other than raids, guilds offer nothing else. You can't trade items between players, you can't use a guild house to PvP in, or you can't use a guild house to hatch pets in with other players. To sum it up, Every time KI has attempted to implement something game-changing or new, it's been launched as a complete flop. It either feels like a worthless addition at best, or a terrible bore at worst. Every new addition hasn't been met kindly. Now I can admit, you cannot please everyone, but if every update ends up making a majority of your players angry, maybe you should look at a feature and ask yourself, is this fun, before releasing it. Looking over the script, every time I talk about a feature, I mostly start with, this feature exists. That's not a good sign. Like that one meme guy says, if it's not fun, why bother? If a feature isn't fleshed out or fun, why add it? KI has an entire launcher for members called a test realm for players to playtest features and give feedback for things like this. But it feels like whenever they add a feature into test realm, they ignore a majority of feedback and just spit it out on the live servers. Why bother having a test realm when the only time you're really going to listen to feedback is when it's spat out on the live servers and is come back to you as everyone hates this? Kingsisle doesn't respect its players. This might end up being a short segment, but I feel it's necessary to bring up regardless. Kingsisle doesn't seem to be in real good standing with its player base. It feels like they've alienated their players as a whole. Whether it be making tweets mocking their player base, to making questionable updates while ignoring all the players who support their game. At one point, they created something called a roundtable, where they invite their biggest players and content creators to talk to them about the game and ask questions. Unfortunately, from the info I've gathered as an outsider looking in, a lot of these creators have made their claims to feel ignored, or that these roundtable meetings are pointless. Why would you invite big-name players to give advice about your game if you're going to ignore them? They show clear favoritism to certain schools while blatantly ignoring others that desperately need buffs. Whether if it's true or not, I as a player feel like the developers are incredibly biased to a lot of the parts of the game, and secretly hate their players. If you were going to ask my opinion, it feels like KI is less run by professional game devs and more like college teams having a party. There's been plenty of odd decisions made by the game devs as of late. When something was previously okay, they change it to make it abruptly more tedious. If there's something fun that's free to earn, KI will eventually rip it out of players' hands and find some grindy way to earn said items for no reason other than to spite players.
Every now and then, Wizard101 puts out a change that literally everybody hates. And today, y'all, Wizard101 tweeted out something that is super controversial. Literally, it has more replies than likes. It got totally ratioed. And this is the tweet, right? Basically, the TLDR is they're cleaning up the crown shop, but the things that they're getting rid of are things that a lot of people buy. And also, the fact that this is something that a lot of people buy with gold, not crowns, it's making a lot of people think that this is just a move to clear out the crown shop more of things that people aren't spending real money on. Don't even get me started on all of the extremely useless tabs under gold, which I still don't see why this exists.
Find a cool item you can craft, but there's one item you need to farm for? Okay, just farm 30 of them. On an average, you get 1, maybe 2 of them per hour. It feels like KI is changing their game to constantly anger their players all the time. It gives the impression that they're out of touch with their player base. Before big company GameAgo had bought them out, one of their leads put all their eggs in the mobile game basket, thinking they were gonna make it big at the mobile games market. So they spent all of their funding into making shovelware mobile games, and a lot of them. Instead of focusing their efforts on the only game making all of their money unironically, which is Wizard101, they've spent all of that money on making mobile shovelware that went completely ignored by the public. Though when players try to give feedback, KI's first instinct is to seem to be calling those players dishonest. So, okay, I'm gonna go off script here for a second. I do not want to keep throwing shade at a company because I don't think they're terrible people. I'm only giving my impression here of how I feel with the devs as a whole. Some of the tweets and some of the responses I see from some of the devs just feel really spiteful towards their players. And I don't want to make these guys out to be terrible people, but it's really hard to keep a good reputation when you're constantly berating your player base or making updates ignoring the pleas of your players. It just kinda sucks, man, you know? Pet training is Heckhounds. Oh, pets!
I hate the way this pet has literally penetrated me up the ass. Are you joking with me, bro? How is this okay? Unbelievable. Are there any devs that are in the chat right now? Can y'all like use words and explain what I'm watching? If there's any, I actually want to know at this point. Is there an explanation for this? I just want to know. I actually want to know if there's an explanation. Like, is this a glitch? What is this?
Pet training is awful and is one of the worst aspects of the game. It's another activity that requires energy. Okay, so one of the most important pieces of gear in your arsenal is your pet. Why? Because pets give off several effects such as buffs, damage resistance, cast spells, some can cast healing spells, or grant your character extra spells for their spell decks. However, when you get a pet, they don't have these abilities immediately. So how do you get these abilities? You train pets, of course. On paper, great idea. You'll have a very in-depth mechanic that adds a whole new layer of complexity to a player's build progression, and the pet is the most flexible and changeable piece of gear in the entire game. So how does it work?
No matter how many videos you watch, at the end of the day, it is all up to RNG. Although the videos are informative, they will tell you to spend thousands of crowns and then more crowns to continuously hatch the pet over and over again.
You throw a boatload of gold into a hatch and hope the pet doesn't have a bunch of terrible skills. Okay, that's a very vague summary, so I will try to be in-depth about the process as possible. So in order to train pets, it requires you to play pet mini-games, which take a lot of time. Not only that, it takes energy with every play, and whenever you complete a minigame, you get pet XP based on how well you do. How much XP you get on perfecting the minigame? Let me show you.
Excuse me, what?
4 XP for all that investment. That is super lame. Also, why does completing this 5-minute minigame give me the same amount of XP as this 20 to 30 minute effort game? But completing any minigame lets you feed your pet a pet snack. Pet snacks give XP based on how many trait points they give. So let's say this pet snack gives your pet 4 trait points. So feeding it to your pet after completing a minigame gives you 4 XP on top of the 4 you got. Of course, you can get better pet snacks that give up to 50 XP points. How long does it take to give a pet snack? What, 3 seconds? So you're saying I spent several minutes for a pathetic 4 XP, but feeding my pet gave them 50. That's why nobody plays these minigames. Okay, I saw this and put in a mechanic where if you perfected a minigame 20 times, you can essentially skip said minigame you perfected, spend energy not playing it, gain 0 XP, and feed your pet to give them the pet snacks XP. That makes the problem so much worse. That's admitting that these training games suck, and you give players a way to skip them. Why can't I just give my pet a snack anywhere I go to give them XP instead? Oh, that doesn't use energy, which is a time-gated resource that recharges slowly over time, so you can't even efficiently train pets. Now let's say your pet got enough XP to level up. Great, they get a talent per level, but the talent you get is completely randomized in the talent pool. If you want your pet to have a specific talent, you have to level up your pet and hope it gets that talent. Great, it's a mechanic locked behind RNG. So as soon as a player gets a pet with a worthless talent, they end up trashing it because it ends up being dead weight at that point. Oh, by the way, that XP bar and energy cost to level up your pet increases every time it levels up a tier. So the process is even slower. You're both locked behind a time-gated and RNG to try to get your pet the talents that you want them to have. Let's say your pet, for some reason, gets incredibly lucky after 200 plus attempts. And remember, you only get about one training session attempt a day, if I'm being generous. But fine, your pet gets all the talents you want. Great, right? Except it's not, because your pet's skill bars are too low. The skills your pet gets more often rely on how high these trait points are. Resist skill relies on having a high will, for example. If your will is too low, too bad, your resist traits are gonna have terrible returns, so you better upgrade those skills. By the way, those bars aren't fixed. Different pets have different levels of skill bars, because let's add another mechanic to slow down pet training even more. To increase these bars, you have to hatch a new pet by using 2 pets, but you have to level up the pets enough to adult stats to make a new baby egg. The egg you get will be one of the 2 parents you hatched with, and its skills and ability pools are a complete random choice out of the parent pools. The stats might increase, or more often than that for some reason decrease on the child. You could end up with a child egg with worse stats. By the way, you get 1 hatch attempt every 12 hours, and the hatching cost requires an absurd amount of gold. Around 30 to 300,000 minimum half the time, unless the pet you're hatching with has terrible skills and talents. Pet making is the absolute worst thing to grind for in the game. Oh, you could have a lot of gold at this point is a bad excuse, because for some unheavenly reason, there is a gold limit on how much gold you can carry. It's another mechanic to slow down player progression. Okay. Besides that, you can hatch pets with other pets from other players. Let's say a player has a pet you really want. Great, go ask to hatch with them. Except it's a 50-50 chance you'll get the pet, right? Except that's also a lie, because if it's a rare pet or a premium currency bought pet, the chances of getting it from a hatch are even lower. Even players are confused, but the community have come up with a possible explanation. Pets have a secret trait called body rarity, meaning a rarer pet or premium pets have a lower chance of actually being hatched in a hatching session. And remember, you get 1 hatch per 12 hours, and it also costs you an arm and a leg in gold. Also, for some reason, newly made eggs have an obligatory wait time attached to them. A lot of them 5 to 10 seconds for some reason, making the wait pointless. But most of the time it's 3, 6, or even 12 to 24 hours. This is time gates to time gates, guys. Oh, on a side note, some premium pets can only be bought and are unable to be obtained by hatching with other players. So haha, you didn't buy the pet, you can't get it. Pet training is a miserable experience that has an absurd wait time. You'll be spending absurd amounts of gold just to hatch a pet. And when you do, you have to wait for the egg to hatch, in which case you waste time training the pet, which equates to spamming the skip game button over and over again and literally force-feeding XP into your pet. Oh, this problem can be half fixed and sped up to have more attempts by paying real money, so I think I see why the mechanics are so awful. And if that pet doesn't have a skill you want, congratulations! You wasted energy, gold, and time, or in some cases real money, for something useless. Now wait another 12 hours and make sure you farm for enough gold to try again. You're farming gold to farm eggs, to farm pet XP, to farm for skills. said pet doesn't get a skill, so you reset the process over and over again. I mean, does this sound fun? Devs, I implore you to look at this system and ask yourself if this is fun. By the way, these are 12-hour wait times per attempt for people that aren't paying anyways. Seriously, if you want the most efficient pet, you have to hope to the moons align for the pet to be the type you want, to have the correct skill XP, and level it up to have all the skills that you're hoping to get. Yeah, you're actually relying on RNG to hopefully get something you actually want. Not just one RNG, but 6 different RNG stats and 5 skill RNGs. So you're praying to RNGimbly 9 different times. You'd have better luck winning the lottery with these odds, and training up a pet to be good, without paying by the way, and if the RNG deities bless you, will take an average player up to 2 to 3 days. And that's if the first attempt works, and more often than not, the first attempt won't work, so you will be making 200 plus attempts, which equates to 300 to 400 different days possibly. How fun! Apparently, at the time of writing the script, KI released a patch to reduce the gold cost of hatching pets by adding a hatch with player option at the hatching kiosk, which does substantially reduce the cost of gold. However, this feature seems to be bugged, as 99% of players you try to hatch with are busy and can't hatch. So the feature feels completely pointless. Throw it in the pile of half-baked updates that just don't work, I guess. Deck building UI is messy. Wizard101 is a video game card game, and what it does well in a lot of places is design, but it's also pretty messy in other places, especially in the deck builder. You flip through several pages of spells with no real way to filter them. They're only ordered with pip cost in mind, that's it, not in alphabetical order, and they take up so much space on the page. You can filter by spell school through the tabs on the top, but that's not enough. If it's one thing card-based games need to get right, it's the deck builder. On the left is all the cards you have in a deck, sorted by images. Hovering over the image shows the player what the card is. The bottom left shows the cards you're getting from equipped items, and on the right is the spells themselves, with the red dots determining how many copies of a card you can add to a deck. However, the card images take up so much space that only 6 cards are shown at a time. If anything needs changed badly, it's the deck builder UI. Now look at another card game like MTG Arena. You can filter cards through various terms like cost, colors, and names. A lot of cards are shown at once to show what the player has access to, and their deck list is on the right of the screen, and it's not obstructing the rest of the cards. This is a fairly clean design, and that filter is a really huge help with making decks. Wizard101's solution, however, is to simply flip through dozens of pages to try and find your preferred spell to add to the deck. Now I know MTG Arena isn't a perfect example of a UI like this, but the filters and more cards shown is a huge upgrade compared to Wizard101's system. Wizard101 cards are too big and bulky in the deck builder, and making decks is a very slow process. And this is probably the most important thing you're going to be doing in the majority of your playtime, is staring at this screen. I'm not a UI designer, Wiz, but I feel like something needs to be done here. Small tangent, because I don't think I'm going to be talking about this anywhere else. I think the adventuring camera is too zoomed in to the player, and when you're on certain mounts, the mount itself takes up way too much of the screen. Please, Wizard101, please let me zoom out my camera more! Games gotta make money. This is probably going to be the most controversial part of this entire analysis.
Oh, I see. Oh, for $120, you get a full set of pajamas and a moped for old people. a wild whale in their natural habitat. It's very rare to see.
But I'm gonna start talking about the game's monetization practices. Any game, especially MMOs, should be allowed to make money. I have no problem with that. If a game wants to charge people a subscription to keep servers up, that's okay. I can fully understand running an MMO costs time and resources, and there's no way it can be kept up for free. Most of the segment's arguments are probably going to be heavily opinionated, but I feel even getting my opinion out there might have some value to someone. I think the biggest issue I have with the game's monetization is every problem I've mentioned up to this point can be circumvented with money. If you're struggling to get certain gear drops, you can buy loot boxes that have a chance to drop that gear. If you're running out of energy or struggling to hatch pets, you can buy elixirs to try again. Reagents too hard to find? You can buy them in bulk. Tired of walking around slowly? You can buy a mount. Yes, you can buy a mount with gold, but who's to say those won't be removed from the shop and replaced with premium only mounts? They even added easy upgrades to Beast Moon hunts, which are only rare time events that aren't always active, that you can buy with premium currency. Heck, remember that farming issue I brought up? At the end of each dungeon run, there's what's called a second chance chest, which you can pay with cash to get more loot drops as if you beat the boss again. But every time you open this chest, the price goes up. However, the drop rates remain the same no matter how expensive it gets. Yeah, you could spend countless hours farming this boss, or you could pay upwards to $80 to $200 to get the loot drops you want from one run. FOMO, or the fear of missing out, is a really vile thing a lot of games try to implement into their games. To quote, "The application of FOMO in a gaming hinges on creating an environment where players feel compelled to continue playing to avoid missing out on rewards, events, or social interaction. This can be achieved through various mechanisms like time-limited events, exclusive rewards, or seasonal content. Wizard101 has a tendency to exploit FOMO way too much. For example, they have a battle pass known as the Scroll of Fortune, in which you buy into and have to log into the game every day to do repetitive tasks to try and get every reward. If you don't, you end up feeling like you wasted money. It's the equivalent of paying for groceries at a grocery store, but the store hounds you to stock their shelves, and they'll give you pieces of the groceries you paid for with every shelf stocked. But miss too many days, and those groceries you paid for get thrown away. It's a rotten system that only exists to literally steal money or force a player to treat their game like a job to earn what they already paid for. And it doesn't help that the Scroll of Fortune is 90% junk anyways. The game has way too many events to do chores in the game or to pay an obscene amount of money just to get some rewards. Their Crowns Rewards event is one of the worst examples of this. During this time, they give you a store progress bar in their crown shop, and the more you fill this progress bar, the more rewards you get. However, the way you progress this bar is by spending crowns. That's it. You literally have to waste money just to progress a bar to get rewards only available during this event. Speaking of crowns, every premium item in this game is bought with a currency called crowns. Premium currency in any game is such a gross mechanic because all it does is inflate the prices of items. Let's say an item in the shop is 1,000 crowns. That's about, say, $2. However, there's no option to buy said item for $2 directly. Instead, you have to go into their store online and buy the minimum price for 2,500 crowns for $5. See, the 1,000 crowns item isn't worth $5, but the game is forcing you to spend more to get the item anyways. Why would I ever want to buy this item when a crafting alternative already exists in the game for free? On the topic of the cash shop, oh sorry, Crown store. Why is everything so seemingly randomly priced? Rarely is there two items that have the same price tag. I could look in the pet section where one pet is worth 3,000 crowns, while another pet is suddenly 12,500 crowns. Why is this house an absurd amount of money, but this house is only worth less than a quarter of the price? Why can't I buy most rental mounts with gold? Why are the mounts worth 15,000 crowns while this one is 7,500? They don't do anything different besides looks. Why is there a gold tab? No, seriously. Why is there a gold tab? Another issue I have with their store is their bundles. They can't sell you an item by itself. It always has to have something added to it to simply inflate the price. Want this gauntlet? It's $40 because it also comes with a bunch of crowns. You want these items out of this bundle? It also comes with membership and crowns, making it a $99 bundle. That's excessively expensive. There are even items in the crown shop that are expensive because it simply has other premium items that are tacked onto the item to inflate the price of. It's trying to make an item look more valuable than it actually is, especially to the player, because you're not going to care about most of the other items you get. And then there's the ultimate nightmare called packs.
And then earlier today, it was a crown event. So every 4,000 crowns, you're going to get a free pack, which is fine. And yeah, it's officially out today. So without further ado, we're just going to open this.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video. And welcome to my biggest pack opening ever.
They released it finally into the crown shop. We can buy it. It's $3.99 crowns each. And it's called the Spiral Villains Horde Pack.
Yeah, I don't like packs and what they promote. Content creators and players, do yourself a favor and stop glorifying these loot boxes. I've seen countless videos of people spending upwards of hundreds on thousands of dollars buying crowns to open a boatload of these packs. It's pretty sad to see hundreds of people throw money at loot boxes that hold pay-to-win or rare items. Remember when Star Wars Battlefront 2 by EA did the same thing with its loot boxes? It was sued by a big corporation. Players were all rightfully upset about the entire thing, and the game had to be completely changed and gutted to work with a no loot box system. However, everyone seems to be okay with how Wizard101 does its loot boxes, and it's actually pretty disgusting to watch. What is pay to win? Pay to win has a lot of meanings to it, but I think the closest example is defined as games in which you get an advantage in the game if you spend real money on items, weapons, or features that are thus clearly superior to non-paying methods. You can farm for a really good set of armor, or you can buy a bunch of loot boxes to get the same armor quicker, for example. And if the loot boxes are honestly pretty garbage, roughly, I'm gonna throwball an estimate here, 80 to 90% of items that are in a PAX loot pool is either useless junk or nonsense items that a player couldn't care less about, and only about 5% is what a player wants. I've admittedly bought packs, which I'm part of the problem. But if I'm opening 10 packs, getting around 130 plus items or so, and trashing all but 3 items, that's literally the loot box selling you junk. There's actually a funny mechanic in a lot of gacha games where it has what's called a pity mechanic. Basically, if a player ends up spending a lot of money on a single loot box, the game will notice that and guarantee something good or legendary tier out of, say, every 10 boxes. Yeah, it sucks, but at the very least the player doesn't feel totally robbed of buying a lot of loot boxes. Wizard101 doesn't have anything like that, as far as me or as most players are aware of. Speaking of gacha, Wizard101 over the years has been playing less and less like an MMO and more of a gacha game. So to run down, a gacha game tends to advertise itself as a free-to-play game while having a lot of gambling mechanics. More often than not, gacha games tend to incentivize players into spending real-world money on chance-based rewards. You spend money to speed up pet training for the pet to have more chances at getting random traits it wants. You spend real-life money to buy increasingly more expensive second chance chests on bosses you're sick of farming for ridiculously low drop rates. You spend a lot of money on loot boxes that are for some reason glorified by the game's community. Gacha games often feature in-game currencies, such as Wizard101's crowns, for example. Gacha has a login or tasks reward system, similar to Wizard101's daily quests. Seriously, looking at a basic definition of gacha, it's scary how close Wizard101 matches that description. And when Wizard101 is trying so hard to push to appeal to kids, it makes all these gacha mechanics all the more disgusting, because gacha is bordering on the lines of online gambling, and gambling shouldn't be monetized so heavily to children. With how the game is monetized, it feels like the game is designed in several aspects to be as grindy as possible. Getting gear is made to be a tedious grind with little to no reward. All the gear drops from the rest of the game might as well feel like an afterthought. Events have a pay-to-win upgrade system to remove all the lengthy grinding. One of the hardest reagents you used to have to grind for before it was changed was included in a battle pass system, which you had to pay into. Players don't get enough of a free experience to consider if they want to even buy a membership or not, and the game doesn't market itself well enough to entice new players to play their game. However, the best solution to every problem I've listed can be solved with open your wallet, and that is a terrible ideal to have in your game. They recently had a crown shop cleanup to try to remove the clutter of their store, but all they did was remove a bunch of items players can buy with in-game gold, and kept the stuff you can only buy with real money. Meanwhile, they still have a bunch of pointless items like rental mounts, which only last you 1 week, or buying gold with real money, which can easily be earned through maybe 20 to 30 minutes of farming. Endgame. The endgame of Wizard101 is almost non-existent. The only few activities you have once you've reached the end of the game is PvP, badly put together raids, or starting a new character. Yes, there's events, but with how they're set up, you either have to spend an obscene amount of time grinding out things like training or Beast Moon event farming just to be optimal, or pay your way through all that, and those events I mentioned are completely separate from your character. So all the effort you put into making your character isn't even required to do events like Beast Moon. It doesn't impact those game modes either. There's no real side activities due. Unless you really want to just do dungeon instances you've probably grinded so much out of that you'd not even consider wanting to do them again. I suppose you can go for badges, but a lot of them are event locked, and some badges are actually impossible to get, and you will not be able to get every badge unless you were playing since the game's inception. You can spend time decorating your in-game castles, but KI has been constantly making changes to make it harder and harder to obtain certain furniture items to do so. Content creators for the game struggle to keep making content for the game. In fact, content creators for Wizard101 end up probably unknowingly became Wizard101's advertisements, since most videos of theirs often tend to promote pack opening videos or glorify spending money in the game. The other half of their videos end up being nothing but criticisms against the game. If there's one thing I want taken away from this overview of the game, it's that I don't want to hate this game. I don't want to forcibly leave a negative view of the game in people's minds. I just want the game to improve and be better. Do I think the game is gonna die? No, I really doubt it. If it's lasted this long, I don't think it's actually going to go anywhere. But I so desperately want this game to improve. Fix some UI design flaws. Make the game more fun and less grindy. Stop putting in half-baked ideas like fishing. I don't think I'm gonna make an entire how to fix game segment because I'm not a game designer, even though I want to become one of these days. All I could do is point out all the problems I could see and list them out and just give my opinions and throw them out there. Maybe hopefully the right people can see this and the game can be great again. Though I can only hope it can anyways.